fans, welcome back to Room 237, and I've got another 1920s silent film. This is another huge classic that I'm surprised I've never got to before, and it's also another one that is a huge, very popular name based on a classic novel and has had many different versions. But this is the 1923 Universal version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Of course, based on the novel by Victor Hugo, who also did The Man Who Laughs, and stars Lon Chaney as Quasimodo. Now, I did not know this beforehand, but this was actually a long time passion project for Lon Chaney. He had been a big fan of the story and had always wanted to play Quasimodo. He even acquired the film rights to the story years before this film ever even went into production. And I do not own it by itself. You can find some HD versions on YouTube. I have it as part of this Horror Classics 50 movie collection. Which, this is another movie, there's many of them in the 20s. Man Who Laughs would be another one, where I think this is more of a drama, more of like a romantic drama, whereas Man Who Laughs also is. But I think a lot of it comes from just where Man Who Laughs, it was Conrad Veidt's makeup, here it's Lon Chaney's. As sort of a monster that it gets lumped in with horror films, or because Lon Chaney is just such a huge name. And of course, this film helped propel Lon Chaney into stardom. It really helped set the standard for having, you gotta have Lon Chaney, he's gotta have makeup. And it would go on to him 2 years later being in the Phantom of the Opera, which is probably still my favorite Lon Chaney film. But of course, he did still do all of his own makeup in this, which the makeup for Quasimodo does look great. I mean, of course, Lon Chaney was revolutionary in doing his own makeup. I don't know if he always had help by Jack Pierce on every picture. Maybe it was every Universal picture, which this was. But I know Jack Pierce would go on to become the monster maker in the 30s and 40s. But Chaney was known for doing all his own makeup. This was directed by Wallace Worsley, who had done a number of films with Lon Chaney, including The Penalty, I think he did A Blind Bargain. He had done a number of films with Lon Chaney, which also, they say that Chaney's working relationship with Worsley was the best Chaney had, even greater than his relationship with Todd Browning, which I guess was also a very successful relationship. Penalty, Ace of Hearts, Voices of the City, and Blind Bargain, he all did with Chaney. And A Blind Bargain, Chaney also plays a hunchback. I guess at one point it was going to be directed by Erich von Stroheim, but that fell through. There's going to be a lot of different cast changes. And also with Chaney having the film rights, because he wanted this to look magnificent. I guess Carl Laemmle was known for cutting down artistic budgets, which Chaney did not want, and this really prevented that. This was, at the time, it was made the most expensive film ever made. I mean, it was made on a estimated budget of $1.25 million. And I mean, there was one point where the director, Worsley, traded in his megaphone for like a loud speaking radio, which the cost of that was equivalent to, what did that say? It was like $7,000 back then, but it would have been like $105,000 last year. And also they made complete set. They erected huge set makeups. Constructed these big sets to look like Notre Dame in Paris of the appropriate time. And that's one of the biggest things I can give this film. The production is a marvel to look at. I mean, it very much does look like they filmed in Paris at Notre Dame. There was one scene that they did, I think it was the Court of Miracles scene, where there was going to be like 3,000 costumes that had to be made for all these extras. And I mean, there were some scenes that took 6 months to prep and get everything built and made. So this was like, this was almost like a James Cameron kind of production for the 1920s. But the production is very well done. And the costumes and hair and makeup looks excellent. It's a great period piece. It takes place in 1482. And one of my favorite aspects of the film is the actual look of the film, the actual production, the setting. I love the look of Notre Dame. And just, I think even the construction of Notre Dame itself took about 6 months to do. And I guess even with Erich von Stroheim, they were worried about, I guess he was known for going over budget and over time. The estimated budget of this film originally was going to be between $750,000 and $1 million. It ended up doing $1,250,000. But this was this was sort of like what Beauty and the Beast and Lion King did for Disney in the 90s, or like what Godfather did for Paramount in the early 70s. I mean, this, they called it, what was it? It's a super jewel of 1923. It was their most successful film. Grossed $3.5 million, which even that was a lot. And the supporting cast is Patsy Ruth Miller, Norman Carey, Nigel de Bruyere, and Brandon Hurst, which Brandon Hurst sounds familiar. What else was he in? Oh, he was the father-in-law character of the of John Barrymore and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay. Which was I think it was my last review. He was also in He Who Gets Slapped, which I have reviewed. He was in The Man Who Laughs, which I have reviewed. Murders in the Rue Morgue, which I have reviewed. He was also in Scarface, White Zombie. Scarface of the 30s, of course. So yeah, he actually was in a lot of movies, and a lot of them, a number of them I have reviewed. Now, in this, it is very different from the novel. I mean, like Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein, Dracula, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Lots of differences. And I mean, it is very different than the 90s animated version, which I did like as a kid. I don't really remember much of it now. I know there's also the 80s version with Anthony Hopkins playing Quasimodo. There was the 90s TV movie that Oh, I think they taped it for us as kids, but we weren't really interested. So the only one I'm super familiar with would be the 90s animated film, which I haven't seen since I was a kid. But this one is very different. And I have to say, of all the silent films I've done so far, this one would probably be my least favorite. Or the one that I don't want to call it boring because it wasn't boring. This is not going to be a rant. It's still a very well-made film. I think the look and the production and Lon Chaney's makeup and the acting are the best. It wasn't a film that I was super invested in, I guess. But it's still very, very well made. It opens up with the King of Fools festival. We don't really get the backstory on Quasimodo. We just know that he's deaf from being the bell ringer, half blind. It's not because of like a sloth Goonies eye. He has like a giant wart over his eye, which is more like the novel. He is more angry, violent, and cynical than in the Disney version, of course. He is angry at society. He is still sort of the cooped up, kind of, not really dirty secret, but like the legend of Paris. Only in this, Claude Frollo is not the villain. He's in it. He's the archdeacon, like in the novel, but he has this brother character named Jehan, who is the evil character who's in love with Esmeralda and evil to Quasimodo. And actually, he doesn't go by Frollo, he goes by Dom Claude. He's actually a good guy in this movie. He's more of the saintly archdeacon. And at the beginning of the film, we see Esmeralda doing her dance with her goat. We get a little bit of her backstory and how she became a gypsy. The character of Clopin, who was like the purple-masked puppeteer jester in the animated film. He's the leader of the gypsies and beggars in this film, the adopted father of Esmeralda, and kind of planning a revolt against the aristocrats, the rich people of Paris. And then we see Captain Phoebus. Now, Phoebus and Jehan both witness Esmeralda at the same time. They both become infatuated with her. There are points where people look up and talk about Quasimodo. He's the ugly monster of Paris. Lon Chaney does an excellent job. I believe he does do all his own stunts in this film. He is very, for being having to do this awkward hunchback and kind of lumbering around. He's very fast, athletic. There are parts where he like descends and flips around and almost does parkour with these gargoyles, which there are no talking come-to-life gargoyles in this film. That might have been a little interesting if they did a little like Hexen kind of looking gargoyles, but it definitely wouldn't fit the tone for this film. He does go down to the festival. He is crowned King of the Fools, but this isn't where his humiliation comes in. It's not like the animated film. But that night, Jehan has him go out and kidnap Esmeralda. He tries, it doesn't work, he gets arrested. Jehan turns his back on him. He's watching from a distance, and Quasimodo sees him turn his back and abandon him. He is sentenced to an hour of public lashings, which it says he's sentenced to 20 lashes, but then when they go to do it, they do it with hourglass. I know in the novel it's hour of lashings and then an hour of I think it's called the pillory thing with. I do that in almost every video now with the hands and the head, the thing. So here he gets his lashes, and that is all public. And then he starts saying that he's thirsty. He's dehydrated. He's beaten. Esmeralda hears this and brings him water in front of everyone. Probably the most famous scene of the film. And and then because of that, Quasimodo has this hatred for Jehan because he knows that he betrayed and abandoned. And Lon Chaney does great. I mean, obviously he's the man of 1,000 faces, but he does so well being able to act through the makeup. And there are several scenes where you get to see him go through all these different emotions just in his face, like sort of neutral and then like curious. Really, he does this thing with his tongue a lot. Or like really like sad and sympathetic. There's this very long scene when he realizes, later on in the film with Esmeralda's fate, where we see him go from sort of neutral to getting really mad and overwhelmed with anger and sadness, and then get determined. And he does it so well just through his face. But also the physical demands of this film, he's also very great in. This film does seem to focus, like the whole midsection, it does seem to focus more on Phoebus and Esmeralda and the two classes, the aristocrats and the gypsies. Phoebus gets promoted to captain. He invites Esmeralda to go to his celebration ball, and he gives her all these really fancy clothes and brings her to the ball. Clopin, leader of the gypsies, hears about this and decides to storm the party with his people. At one point, there was this sort of subplot where the aristocrats had this person, I guess like a spy, dressed like a gypsy, sort of get in with them, and then they find out, and then they're gonna kill him publicly, but in front of just them, and Esmeralda saves his life. It's the, what the hell was his name? They call him the poet of the streets. Pierre Gringoire. But anyway. And then he kind of has like a small role with Phoebus throughout the rest of the film. So they storm the ball, get Esmeralda back. She admits to Phoebus that she doesn't love him and she has to be with her people, but she's doing that just to prevent bloodshed. So then after that, she gets the poet guy to give Phoebus a letter saying, I want to see you one last time, but it is to say goodbye. So then they meet up, but Phoebus gets stabbed by Jehan, who followed them. Esmeralda gets mistaken for being the one who stabbed him, so she gets imprisoned. They do torture the confession out of her because this is sort of during the age of the Inquisition. And one thing, there are several male characters in this who, whenever they see something romantic like Esmeralda's note or them getting back together, and the poet guy is one of them, where, again, silent films are very visual. They do have to emote and act with their a physicality a lot, where they do this like, it is kind of humorous. And so then Phoebus, even Phoebus, when he wakes up, because he lives, he questions, was it really her that stabbed me? And then I think the poet has to convince him, no, it was that evil dude that lives at the church. So Esmeralda is sentenced to be executed by gallows, not burning, which I believe it was a burning even in the novel. And that's when we get that great scene of Quasimodo up on the ramparts of Notre Dame. And we get this long cut of his face as he goes through a whole spectrum of emotions through the makeup. Does a phenomenal job at it. And again, for those that don't know, and I've mentioned this in a couple of my reviews for Lon Chaney films, both his parents were deaf. So Lon Chaney spent his whole life really having to use body language and gestures as the main means of communication. So he really knew how to use his body and emote, and it was just another one of those things that just made it be like, he is the king, he is the master of the silent era. Then he died in 1930, right at the cusp of the dawn of talkies coming in, silence going out. And again, I think this was his own stunt too. They might have had some safety measures, but where he jumps on the rope and he descends all the way down, grabs Esmeralda, goes into the church, claims sanctuary. Dom Claude has to keep, the armed men out, because it was a law back then. If someone claims sanctuary, as long as they're in the church at least, they can't be arrested. And so then we find out that Clopin was gonna plan, a whole, sack the town on the day of her execution and rescue her. But the authorities knew there was going to be some sort of uprising, so they just decided to execute her that day, so there could be no plans. Clopin finds out, they storm Notre Dame. Quasimodo tries to keep them all out by throwing shit at them. He even drops a large board, which lands on several of them. They start using it as a battering ram. Quasimodo's getting these huge cauldrons of molten lead ready, which he then dumps on all of them. Which at first, and Esmeralda doesn't really say anything, she just kind of acts all faint whenever he does something. But they seem to think Quasimodo's on their side, I guess, because they're like, the Hunchback sent us a battering ram. But then Jehan shows up. He even tells Esmeralda, it was Phoebus's dying wish that I take care of you. She doesn't buy it, so then he tries to force her with him. Quasimodo sees this, grabs a hold of him, goes to throw him off the rampart from high up. But in the scuffle, he stabs Quasimodo 3 times. At this point, Phoebus shows up, sees Esmeralda, they embrace, share a kiss, which Quasimodo sees, accepts, and then dies. But Claude Frollo and one other guy who witness, and the street poet guy, they happen to see Quasimodo do his final act, which is he brings his own death toll. And that's really the end of the movie. But so it is one of those stories where I think each adaptation is different in its own way. For a while, it does seem that The Hunchback takes a backseat to his own film. And it does focus more on the class rivalry of gypsies and aristocrats. the romance between Phoebus and Esmeralda, but also the longing and jealousy, love, and lust from Jehan for Esmeralda really only shows up when it needs to, like when he has Quasimodo kidnap her, when he stabs Phoebus, and then at the end. But again, Lon Chaney, he is the crown jewel of this film, along with the production. It does do a good job at establishing his character of he's strong and violent and can be angry and sort of betrayed by society and even his master. But he has a kind heart. Like, after he saves Esmeralda and she's laying in the bed and he cuts the ropes off her wrist, she wakes up and is kind of startled by him. And that's when he kind of gets sad, starts to walk away. And then the intertitles say, you know, all Quasimodo knows about her is that she was once kind to him, which is when she brought him the water during his punishment. That's really all Quasimodo knows about her, really, is that at one point she was kind to him, and that was enough to make him want to save her. So that does a great job at establishing his character. And then when she starts to, like, pat his head, he really breaks down in happiness because someone's being sweet to him. It does imply that Dom Claude is more of a guardian to him than Jehan, who's just an angry, abusive, even kind of a throwaway attitude type of master. But I'll say the actors did do their job. Again, the best part of this movie, other than Lon Chaney, would be the absolute stunning production design. It really does look like Paris. It does, Paris of that period. It really does. You know, the costumes are very well done. Hairstyles very well done. I love the look of Notre Dame itself. I love the look of, you know, the city, and just the sort of, not really cobblestone, but however the streets were at that time. Very, very impressive that back in 1923 they put all of that into this film. And I think a lot of that we do owe to Lon Chaney, because he, again, this was a huge passion piece for him. And he didn't just want it to be, oh, here's characters from a book that you all know, hope you like it. He wanted it to be as artistically grand and accurate as possible. So we can thank Lon Chaney for that, on top of his great performance as Quasimodo. Again, I would say this is more of a romantic melodrama, or a period drama. But I think it is because where it is one of Lon Chaney's bigger films, and Lon Chaney's in it, and it is one where he has like the heavy makeup to be the monster of the film, or at least have the appearance of the monster in the film. I get people say, well, the normal looking guy is the monster. The monster is actually the hero. Yes, that's obvious, but I mean, the one that looks like the monster. That it gets lumped in with Chaney's other monster horror film. Monster films with makeup like this. Again, this is still my favorite. And even the story of Hunchback of Notre Dame isn't a story that I love as much as, say, Frankenstein, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Phantom of the Opera, where I like to see as many different adaptations as possible. I mean, if I do, I do, but not really as sought after as those stories. But for a 1920s film, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that, because I've been loving these 1920s films. But I guess for one that isn't as straightforward horror as some of the other ones, there is a lot to appreciate. And again, this one maybe more so than others. Maybe not as much as Phantom of the Opera, because this was another one where they recreated like the Paris Opera House and a lot of Paris, which I think even some of these sets from Phantom of the Opera were left over and used again from Hunchback. I would say Hunchback and this are the ones that have some of the best and grandest and most impressive, especially for being period films, production design and attention to detail of real architectures. So put that along with Chaney's wonderful performance. It really is a very well-made film, and there is a lot to appreciate. Again, it is in the public domain. It went in the public domain in the 1950s, along with Phantom of the Opera. And Universal never renewed their rights. But you can find it all over YouTube. There is a really nice HD version, so I do recommend it. But that is 1923's Hunchback of Notre Dame. Thank you for watching.